Okay, let's go further. Acute pancreatitis, or the episode of acute inflammation of this gland during chronic pancreatitis, happens or happened due to different reasons. The most common are ethanol, alcohol, and gallstones. The gland is inflamed. If it is inflamed and has edema, several substances are in hyperproduction. Interleukin 1, interleukin 6, and TNF-alpha. Their substances go to blood, inside the blood circulation. If they do so and reach the brain, they activate the hypothalamic system to increase the temperature of the body. The patient with acute pancreatitis or escalation of the chronic one will have the increased temperature. Then those substances influence the vessel wall and decrease the contractility, the ability to contract. They decrease it. So the dilatation of vessels happens. Those vessels become more permeable and blood loses water component that goes into tissues. The question is, if the liquid part of the blood goes to tissue, what will happen to the peripheral tissues? First question. The second question, if the vessels are dilated, what will happen to the blood pressure? The third question, if blood loses blood, has its liquid component and cell component. If blood loses water component, what will happen to hematocrit? The relation between amount of red blood cells to total blood. 3 questions. Go on further. Acute pancreatitis happened. Those substances are in blood. They call over hypercoagulation, for the first time clotting, and then because of decreasing of amount of platelets, it will cause the first time hyper, and then it will be a hypercoagulation. Hypercoagulation will lead to bleeding. The patient will be easy to have bleeding. So, if bleeding happens, what will be to the amount of red blood cells? And what will happen to the amount of hemoglobin in the blood? If you take a lab test, what are you expecting? Go further. Their substances goes through the blood flow to the immune tissues that produce immune cells, macrophages, monocytes, neutrophils, and so on. What are you expecting? And those enzymes increase the producing of those cells. What do you expect to find in a lab test, in a blood test? What will be to those cells, to the amount of them? And then, as you already know, if the vessels are permeable and can easily lose water and the pancreas is damaged, the juice goes out of the pancreas right into the blood. This juice is filled with lipase and amylase. The amount of lipase in a lab test will be multiplied to 3 will be increased more than 3 times. Lipase is more important because it stays in the blood for a long period. Amylase goes back more rapidly. So the increased amount of those ferments and the bleeding will lead to a symptom, Great Turner symptom, the subcutaneous bleeding that you can see like bruises on the flanks of the belly. And Cullen symptom, it is the subcutaneous bleeding that happens around the belly button. And you could see it when you investigate a patient. If you see those signs, it is very, very common to have an acute pancreatitis. But the question is, the temperature will be high. What will happen to the peripheral tissues if we have a dilatation and liquid loss? What will happen to blood pressure in acute pancreatitis? What will happen to hematocrit? What will happen to red blood cells amount and to hemoglobin amount if patient has a bleeding? What will happen to the amount of white blood cells if they are stimulated? And you already know that it is important to take a lab test to lipase. If it is increased, it's actually a patient has a pancreatitis. Amylase is less common. Lipase is more common. It is about pathogenesis of symptoms, pathogenesis of complications and states that happens in acute pancreatitis.